Alrighty, folks, we are going to have a conversation about real estate and specifically the impact on real estate from weather events like these very nasty and destructive hurricane Helene and the one that just hit Florida yesterday, Milton. I do want to just highlight right out of the gate that this conversation is about real estate. And frankly, none of that matters when there is loss of life and destruction and things of that nature. But as a channel focused on real estate, I think a lot of people are going, what will be the impact on housing, on multifamily, on office, just the real estate market in general? Please understand that we both understand that there is real life impact from this. This is not to diminish, ignore, or any of those things. If you can help in any way, donate to Red Cross or any other like institution, please do so. People really need help out there. But Jonathan, we're going to talk about real estate and what the possible impact on real estate might be. And I think there's going to be a rather large impact, but it might be different than some people are thinking.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to echo your statement about what's going on. My heart really goes out to people who are affected by this, and um, really hope that nobody takes this the wrong way. We're not making light of the situation.
Gosh, no.
It's really tragic what's happened, and I know a lot of people are suffering. So really hope that they're okay. It seems like at least so far, loss of life has been fairly minimal from Milton, which is a relief. But
Mhm.
we still don't know really what's going on yet. So if you're affected by this, my heart goes out to you, and I really hope that things get back to normal fast. So, um, but I know it's going to be a long road for a lot of people. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, okay, so shifting gears into how this uh, uh, is going to affect real estate. Listen, let's just also off the bat kind of say, like, hey, this really, what you think about climate change is really irrelevant. Like, it doesn't really matter what you think is going on. The fact of the matter is, we've had a lot more storms in recent years and big storms and devastating storms than we have had in the past. And uh, the cause of it doesn't matter because it's going to be reflected in insurance costs regardless, right? The more money that insurers are losing in covering these storms,
Mhm.
the more it's going to translate into uh, higher premiums. And
Yep.
the insurance companies don't care why; they just need to offset those losses. So I think that the real impact of these storms is going to be just another, you know, big jump in insurance costs for anywhere that is vulnerable to hurricanes. And I think, the real issue, even more than Milton, I think the issue is Helene and the fact that you know millions of people who really didn't think that they had any hurricane risk have now had a massive losses, and
Yeah.
the insurance companies are going to look at that and start reassessing their models, and
Mhm.
that's going to affect the insurance costs for a lot broader an area than I think we had thought of in the past.
Mhm.
So and I really we can get sort of more granular about sort of which states we think are going to be affected, but I'll just sort of turn it over to you for your
Yeah.
initial thoughts. Yeah.
It's funny after the horrible events of Helene, even before I think Milton was a named storm, I've been going back and trying to figure out what was the hurricane impact, and I specifically went back to Katrina. Right, Katrina, if you don't remember, was the horrific, hopefully once in a generation storm that hit New Orleans directly, right? And obviously, New Orleans is below sea level, so when you get storm surge and all of that, there's mass destruction. And I actually talked to 5 or 6 people that have rentals in and around New Orleans. Some of them have before, some of them after. And the stories are kind of similar. For a brief time, call it, I don't know, during the cleanup phase, call it months. Um, Obviously rent collections were down, vacancies were up, all of that was certain. But then everyone said, shortly thereafter, when it went from cleanup to rebuild, occupancies skyrocketed, rents skyrocketed because the inventory of safe and habitable homes was greatly diminished, kind of supply and demand 101. The other thing that you saw, at least in Katrina, is you saw the federal government step in and create some incentives for new home construction, right? Because there were so many lots just completely wiped out. They created some tax incentives and things of that nature. So what all of my research showed is there was a short-term negative impact, call it months, but then there was years of huge occupancy, rent growth, all of that as people migrated to New Orleans to rebuild New Orleans. And then after about 18 months to 2 years, maybe 2.5 years in some areas, it kind of went backwards again as people as the projects completed, they went elsewhere. And again, I think Katrina was a little unique because New Orleans is a gigantic city and it's pretty, isolated. But when I think about Helene, and this was again before Milton, we haven't really seen the impact of Milton yet. I was thinking about Helene, and I know nothing about that part of the country. I've never been there. I don't know it. I only can share what I've read, but it does very much feel more spread out. It does definitely feel more town-like versus major city, right? New Orleans has a football team. They have a basketball team, right? They're gigantic. And I wonder, and I said this on a daily financial news, I wonder how many of those towns will just not rebuild because they'll go somewhere else, right? They'll migrate down, they'll kind of collect together. They just choose not to rebuild where they were. And if that's the case, if that's a choice, right? They choose to go somewhere else. Those property values, even if the home is standing, cut, slashed, right? Because there's going to be no town, right? No food, no, just town. So the other thing that I think about the Appalachian Trails, again, just with my research, is it was a hotbed. I mean, like a red hot hotbed for Airbnb, VRB, or short-term
Mm.
rentals. And if you got into a market like that and you have the wrong insurance profile, you're effed, right? And near as I could tell, I've seen some numbers where flood insurance was a single digit number, 6, 8, 9%. And if you
Yeah.
don't know anything about Milton, most of the damage was flood related. So I expect catastrophic losses by homeowners and not necessarily by insurance, right? There, of course, will be some, no doubt. But I suspect that the insurance impact from Helene, because it will, for the most part, be flagged as flood, will be less than we expect. So I mean, let's think about just being a homeowner, right? You buy an Airbnb. Let's just say you're killing it. I mean, which I don't think you are today, but let's just say you are. You're making thousands of bucks a month because you got the property, but then it gets flooded. You have to cancel all your reservations. You file an insurance claim. 4, 6, 8 weeks go by, and you get the notice. Sorry, we're only going to pay, you know, a third of the cost because it was wind related, not water. But you're on the hook for everything else. What do? I suspect most people walk,
Yeah.
which means they take a hit in their equity, and then the bank takes a hit because the structure is not salvageable. I mean, those are some strategic defaults coming. I think that's kind of my run research of Helene already. Sorry for the long winded, but I've been
Yeah,
thinking
but
about this for a while.
you make some interesting points though, and I'm just going to add some of my own thoughts to this. So you alluded to the lack of flood insurance. A lot of people who were affected by flooding were outside the official flood zones, right?
Correct.
So because those flood zones are not really taking into account like a
Yeah,
major
a
to
hundred
rain
year
dump like
flood that
this.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's but even within the flood zones, I mean, there's just a lot of people who just are like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to
yeah,
get the flood insurance. Why would I spend the money?
yeah.
And then they're screwed by this. But I think what's also on the Airbnb front, a lot of those towns in the Appalachian mountain chain are are basically cut off because of the
Yeah.
damage to infrastructure, right? So even if you had no damage to the house itself, right? You may be like out of luck because people just can't get there anymore.
Yeah.
And the way that the way that people think that even after the infrastructure is fixed, which is going to take a number of years in a lot of cases, people will still just their memory will be, oh yeah, that can't get there. So it'll be harder, for
Mhm.
some folks to recover from these properties. I do agree with you that you know as a homeowner, you have a lot more incentive to suck it up and rebuild, or
Correct.
because it's where you live. But if this is just purely an investment property, I think you will see people
Just
walking
walk.
or just
Yeah, it's a
trying,
business
just trying,
decision.
just selling to get to get out. And who knows? I mean, maybe these things always there's so many different ways these things can work out. If you are like say the Airbnb owner and you had no damage, but the viability of your Airbnb is now impacted, but on the other hand, like a lot of houses have been flooded out, you might actually get a good price for your
You
property
could.
if you're trying to
Mhm.
sell it, right? So uh, who knows how this will shake out exactly? But I think that for me though, I think what we're going to see though is whether whether insurance takes the big hit or not. I mean, how could it not? There's going to be a big
Oh,
impact
gonna
of
be
this
some.
storm,
No, no
right?
doubt. No, there's no doubt.
And that's going to we've already seen over the last few years that places at risk of storm, whether it's wind, flood, whatever, insurance rates have been just really skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And last year there was a little bit of relief, right? So people felt like, okay, maybe the worst of it is over. I think that this just all bets are off now again, especially in Florida. I mean, I think Florida is really going to,
Oh, for
they've
sure.
been having such an issue with insurance costs already, but this just is just going to make it even worse. And you really wonder whether Florida's big advantage and the reason that they've had so much population growth over the last few years is because the cost of housing was so much less, right,
Mhm.
than the places people were migrating from. Now, that affordability has eroded a lot over the years just because of the population movements, right? I mean, just supply and demand. But the insurance costs are really adding to this as well.
Mhm.
It'll be interesting to see whether um, whether this really starts to dampen the migration patterns towards Florida because just
I don't
because of
see how it
affordability.
doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't see how it doesn't. When you look at the Florida real estate market, you even before either storm, Florida and Texas were responsible for roughly 40% of the inventory growth in active listings. So I think Florida is already kind of past the peak, if you will, at least for this cycle. They got some pain. The other thing though about Florida is we can go back and look at I think it was Hurricane Ian that hit like Punta Gorda and was kind of a direct hit there. And that was over 2 years ago. And the reason this is important is if you actually go search that zip code and search for damaged homes or Ian or things like that, there's actually a lot of active inventory coming on now, 2 years later. And that's just because that's the foreclosure process,
Mm.
right? There was a process of, homeowners, they probably had 6 months of like forbearance because they were impacted. And then they decided not to do this and not to do that, blah, 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 blah. And that inventory is showing up now. So again, you got to realize a lot of people think like disaster happens, foreclosure spike because of strategic default. That's not the timeline, right? The timeline for strategic default, even on a broken or busted Airbnb that's flooded out, it's not going to show up until late 25,
Mm.
maybe even 26. That's just people forget the timeline. They always think it's like an immediate impact, and it's just not.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I'm also sort of thinking about this not just in terms of these particular two storms, but more generally,
Mhm.
if you've got an increase in storms and it's not some freak thing, but it's sustained, right? And people start to believe that it's a sustained thing, and insurance rates reflect that. Who what markets benefit from this? And like I
Yeah,
think
that's a great question.
I
That's a great
think
question.
I mean, and especially, one of the big drivers of uh, migration from north to south has been weather, right? It's not, people
Correct.
talk about the cost of living, but you know, like say the cost of living in a, a small city in upstate New York or in the Midwest is not appreciably higher than Florida, right? You're buying a house for $200,000, right? It's not like moving from New York City to Florida.
Right.
So a
Those
lot of
moves
what,
already happened.
right, a lot,
Yeah.
a lot of what is driving it is weather, right? People don't want to deal with winter, so they're moving to a place with
Yeah.
mild or no winter. But as winters become milder and summers down south become hotter, I've always wondered whether maybe you're not going to see like reverse migration per se, but I wonder if you see a slowdown in migration to the extent that people have been moving because they want to escape harsh winters,
Yeah.
and harsh winters are not really a thing anymore,
Oh,
right?
I
So
agree with that. So I think what you're pointing at is is $100 million question. I think the big question is what becomes the next Florida, right? If you rewind the clock and look at actuals over the last 10 or 20 years, there has been a migration of Florida because of weather and close to water and all of those things by the rich. That then transpired to more and more people. But given what we talked about, that weather exchange not being ideal and the cost of living being almost equal, I think there's another area. I think if you could find that, be the first mover, that's it. I mean, could it be South Carolina? Could it be North Carolina? Could it be Alabama? I mean, I don't know that geography at all, but the logic says there will be somewhere else people go.
well, I mean, South Carolina is interesting because it's already, I mean, for the last 20 years, it's already been receiving a lot of what they call sort of rebound migration,
Mm.
where people move from the Northeast to Florida and then
And
they
then they
don't
go
like
back
it.
up. Yeah,
And
they
but
go
they
up.
don't want to move back north, right? So they go halfway and they wind
Okay.
up in a place like South Carolina. Now, Charleston is now, most people are priced out of the Charleston market. So they've been moving to places like Greenville,
Mm.
right? But that's increasingly getting expensive too. But it's certainly still, cost of living wise, uh, cheaper than the Northeast. I think, frankly, I think where you are in Nevada, I think Nevada is going to benefit from this a lot because it's, I mean, you've got water issues, but in sort of environmentally very stable, right? You're not,
Mhm.
there's no hurricanes, or you're just too far inland. You're not really in the tornado belt, right? Like,
No
so
earthquakes to
no
speak of.
earthquakes. You don't have any forests, so there's no wildfires,
No,
right?
there's no.
you
Yeah, we
know,
don't worry about those.
you know what I mean? So, like, I think that places like Nevada could actually come out pretty well from this, or that could be a place where people start moving if, you know, they want to escape the
No,
cold
I
weather or
agree.
what have you,
Yeah, and I've been here over a year, and again, a lot of people think about Vegas. They only think about the Strip, and I will admit to being one of those people because I've been to Vegas 100 times for events, but it was always the Strip. Locals, we never go there unless there's some concert or comedy show we want to see, like Seinfeld or Ed Sheeran or a football game or something. We never go there. There's all kinds of places to eat and attractions, and it's an amazing place. I love Vegas. I love Henderson. So
yeah, like I think also, some parts of the Midwest may benefit.
sure.
Um, and I've also, I mean, a pet theory of mine too for a long time has been that if you want waterfront property, the place to buy it is on the Great Lakes, because
Yeah.
because if you've ever been to the Great Lakes, it's like being on the ocean, right? But
Mm,
you cannot see to the other side. It just looks like being on the ocean, and you're 1,000 or more feet above sea level, so you're not worried
mm,
about like encroachment of the sea on your waterfront property. You know, it's
yeah.
beautiful there. Obviously, it's not a year-round place because of the winter, but as winters become
Hey,
less harsh,
yeah.
so I think that's like, I'm calling like the sleeper place to buy beachfront or
Yeah.
waterfront property
I
is
like
the
it.
Great Lakes.
Oh, I love that. Folks, if you are watching this and you have property or know something, let us know about the Great Lakes. What have you seen? Is it the sleeper town that Jonathan? I think he's right. I that's what I think. Like if you want waterfront, it doesn't have to be ocean. It
Yeah.
can be big bodies of water, which I think is an awesome intake. But let's go back and I think Helene, again, at first blush, um, is really going to be Katrina like, where
Yeah.
there's an initial several months of cleanup and just like taking inventory, like what's left, what's slightly damaged, and what needs to be scraped. And then I think the question becomes individual, right? Do owners do anything or take the insurance check and run or what? And then, but I do think there's a bigger question that I don't think Katrina had, and that is, do the towns stay or go?
Mm.
And again, I've been hearing about towns with 1,000 people, 1,500 people, and tragic losses. Do they rebuild there, or do they, go downriver, or do two small towns meet in the middle and become a something? I think I think there will be. I think the map, right? The cities, the towns. I think they change in 3 to 5 years. Some exist, some won't.
I mean, I guess it really is going to depend on how big the towns were and how much destruction there was. But I think people are pretty attached to where they live, and they tend to
Mm,
kind of rebuild where they are unless they're essentially told,
you
no, we're
can't.
not going to allow it, right? Like, we won't
Right.
allow you to build on this mountainside anymore, or you can't get insurance or whatever it is. But I mean, you know, I don't know if you remember Hurricane Irene, that
Hmm.
was like 2011, and that's New York City got all this flooding because of the
Hmm.
storm surge. But also, what
I
happened
remember.
was the storm moved up basically directly north of New York, up into upstate New York and Vermont, and it just sat there for several
Mm.
days. So it wasn't a hurricane anymore, but it just rained, just dumped a massive amount of rain. And you had a lot of these small towns that were experienced really bad flooding, and a lot of infrastructure washed away. I haven't heard of any towns sort of disappearing off the map
Oh,
as a
good,
result. They
good,
just sort of rebuilt, and I think that's what will happen in
awesome.
in the Appalachian Mountains. And
I,
I
I I
think,
think that would be a great outcome. I mean, be clear, I'm not hoping for any towns to
yeah,
disappear. I think there's a lot of value in community and history and all of that. Um, but sometimes, like you said, they come in and go, "Whoops, we can't build here anymore." Right?
yeah,
That
that
could be a
I
problem.
could see that potentially happening. But I think it'll be like Katrina in the sense that it's kind of a one-time event. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think that um, I don't think anybody's really predicting that like a lot more hurricanes are going to start traveling that
Yeah.
route,
Yeah. It
right?
was. It was.
So,
Yeah. Good.
but I think Florida is the place where, I mean, look, it juts out into the ocean. It's
Yep.
surrounded by warm water, right? And it can get hurricanes from both sides, as we see now.
Right.
So I think the long term impact on Florida is going to be much greater
Yeah.
than
Let's talk about Florida, because
you
I
know.
think, again, what we're seeing in Florida. I've only seen some early pictures. Um, and now some of this could be because the storm kind of splintered last minute, which was obviously a good thing. But in Florida, they're building houses different, right? In
Yeah,
Florida, a lot of the new construction is cement, right? It's not wood or siding or anything
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And I think what they're going to see on Florida is what's working from new construction and not. And and if that's the case, then I think it's just a recycling of the old to the new. Assuming the landscape doesn't change, right? You lose 100 feet of shoreline or something crazy. Um, but yeah, I think what we're going to see when the sun is on Milton is what what can stand and what can't.
yeah,
And I think they're going to get better at building, you know, Cat 5 hurricane homes. I was listening to somebody the other day. Somebody I interviewed is Alex on the channel. He's in Tampa Bay. He's
yeah,
in a high rise, and he didn't evacuate. He's like, and he did some live streams and all this. We talked, and he's like, dude, my condo's brand new. It was built to withstand 200-mile winds. It's bulletproof glass. You know, we're going to be fine. And sure enough, he showed pictures this morning. A couple of his windows had cracks, which he's like, oh my God, I can't believe this cracked. It's, like it's an inch thick. He had a couple of leaks from the window cracks. And he's like, yeah, all good. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
But I mean, well, you probably know better than I do about that, though. I mean, it would seem to me that building things with bulletproof glass and concrete is a lot more expensive than stick-built homes, though, right? So,
well, if
like,
the trade off is insurance, right?
trade-off is insurance, but I mean to spend an extra $200,000 to save $6,000 on your insurance bill, like I'm not sure that that
But the
trade-off works
problem
for
is,
everybody.
no, it does certainly doesn't work for
Yeah.
everyone. But I think what we're going to see is, I think the cities or counties, however it works out there, they're just going to say no new construction unless you're built to this criteria.
Yeah, I could definitely imagine that happening. But like everything else, I mean, every time you start imposing more restrictions on how people can build, it jacks up the price, right? And
Nope,
and
no
then
question.
and you've got a lot more compliance burden as well. And you've got, if the city's got to come and inspect, I mean, they always have to come and inspect, obviously. But I mean, just all of that stuff is just going to,
Yeah,
I think, lead to delay. And we don't know. I mean, I don't know, like, if it's concrete construction, does that mean that they can pour the concrete someplace else and just move it in and build it more quickly, or does it take longer because you've got to do it on site? I have
yeah,
no idea.
no idea. No,
So
not my
yeah,
expertise. But the
yeah,
other thing I think is very true about Florida, and this was before either hurricane, I think it only gets worse from here. If you're in an old condo,
yeah. Oh yeah,
you're
this has been a big issue. Yeah,
big
yeah,
issue, right? We had that horrible collapse, horrible loss of life. HOAs can't get insurance. They're having special assessments. I think older condo values are going to plummet because of
well,
that.
and why wouldn't the same be true for houses as well, right?
I think, yeah, if you're near the
Yeah,
water,
yeah,
absolutely.
if you're stick built on a slab in a flood zone,
Mhm.
right? You know,
You're
you're
gambling, right?
yeah,
Eventually, that's not going to be there. Now it could be decades, who knows? But yeah, I think that's exactly what happens in Florida. Again, as an outsider who's never lived there, only read and watched videos, is there's going to become hurricane approved. I don't know what you call it, building or construction, and not or
yeah,
risky or whatnot. And I think that if you fast forward Florida in 10 years, I think a much larger percent of the what will be the existing stock is hurricane related. I think that's something we've learned. And again, what does that mean? That means a whole decade of construction, right? You bring
yeah,
people in, you slowly build around, and it's a whole process.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about insurance, right? Because again, I think what people are going to learn about this is, again, flood insurance is an elective insurance for lots of people if you're not in flood zones. Um, and you know, floods can happen. And I
Well,
think a lot of people are going to learn about that.
I mean, and here's something else too, which I think people may not always make the connection, but uh, you know, if you have a mortgage on your property, your lender is going to require a certain level of
For sure.
coverage that
And
you got,
and
right?
and it's they
So
validate it every year.
yeah, and so you don't, unless you own your house outright, right?
Mhm.
You don't really have the luxury of not, I mean, luxury.
Yeah.
I think it's dumb not to have insurance, but I mean, some people make that election because they decide it's too expensive, but you don't have that option if you have a mortgage. And certainly for commercial properties, and we haven't really talked about multifamily at all, but insurance costs have just skyrocketed in recent years on multifamily with a little bit of a breather last year on renewals. But your lender is very particular about the
Of
kind
course.
of coverage, the level of deductibles. I mean, they impose very low deductibles on you, which is very expensive, and uh, this is certainly not going to help, right? And if now they're only going to start. I mean, you could see if the losses are bad enough, right? You could see insurers starting, or lenders too, but starting to say, we're just not going to lend on
Oh yeah.
X kind of property, right? I mean, they already do it with certain kinds of construction where it's very difficult to get a loan for
Mhm.
certain kinds of construction, some older construction and stuff. But I could see if this becomes really more, if lenders get spooked by this, then you're going to see an even more like tight leash for multifamily investors in terms of the kinds of properties they can buy, the kinds of properties they can get loans on, and the kind of insurance coverage that they're going to have to maintain, which can become very, very expensive.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, something that I never really thought about honestly for 20 plus years of investing was insurance, right? You get liability insurance, I always chose full replacement cost, always had an umbrella, always increased my umbrella as my net worth rose. Um, but I never really thought about it. And then I think it was a year, maybe 18 months ago, I got my first refusal to renewal.
Mm.
Then I started getting, huge increases in insurance. And yeah, I mean, insurance is something it's front and center right now, especially for a guy who's got an existing portfolio, who's buying, infrequently. Insurance is suddenly front and center because it's expensive out there. And, people are, California, there are people pulling out, entire insurance companies pulling out. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about the impact of NOI on
Hmm.
pricing, well, a lot, right? And so you may not think like, hey, it's if your insurance goes up by $10,000, well, what's the big deal, right?
Yeah,
But I mean, you know, your insurance goes up by $10,000, even at a 10 cap, you're talking about $100,000 of lost
exactly.
value, right? So at an 8 cap, it's like $120,000, right? So
Correct.
this starts to add up, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's not just about the expense; it's the value too.
No, absolutely. By multifamily investors, if your insurance is wrong in your spreadsheet by 10,000 bucks, yeah, your value's down. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
what people
yeah. And insurance
significant
has been
impact.
going up by more than that, right? I
Oh,
mean, it's
for
been,
sure.
like people have been getting their insurance costs doubled, right? So going from 30,000 to 60,000. I mean, you're talking like real value at this
Hmm.
point, right?
Yeah.
So it's an issue. It's an issue for
Yeah.
sure.
Totally agree. Jonathan, you do a lot of great stuff. Love this conversation. You talk about multifamily all the time. Where can people find you?
Yeah, come follow me on LinkedIn. Send me a request on LinkedIn. I'm happy uh, to accept it. Always love talking to people who are from this channel. You can also join my school group, which is school.com/AIC, short for Apartment Investors Club, where you get full access to all my courses. We get 2 calls a month with me, and there's other options as well. So hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan.